Good evening, and welcome to Scotland at 7 on this, the 11th of February. I'm Douglas MacKenzie, bringing you stories from Scotland and around the world on Broadcasting Scotland's evening news programme. I'm very pleased to be joined again tonight by Maureen Watt to discuss the stories behind the news. As I'm sure most of you know, Maureen had a long parliamentary career, including ministerial appointments in the Scottish Government in education and skills and in mental health, and now, since last year, has been president of the SNP. So welcome back once again, and thank you.
Good evening, Douglas. Nice to see you again.
We'll begin tonight, as we always do, with an update from Ukraine on day 1084 since the full-scale Russian invasion of the country. Ukraine implemented emergency power restrictions this morning as the Energy Minister German Galushenko said a Russian attack on gas infrastructure was underway. A Ukrainian drone attack damaged an industrial facility in Russia's southern region of Saratov, its governor said early on Tuesday. Ukraine's Lieutenant Colonel Andrei Kovalenko said it was the Saratov oil refinery that supplies the Russian army with fuel, but did not directly say it was the result of a Ukrainian attack. The Russian aviation regulator, Rosaviatsia, said it was suspending flights at the regional airport, as well as those in Kazan, Ulyanovsk, and Kirov. On Monday, Donald Trump left open the possibility that Ukraine, quote, may be Russian someday, and called for trading US aid for Kyiv's natural resources, such as rare minerals. They may make a deal, they may not make a deal. They may be Russian someday, or they may not be Russian someday, Trump said in an interview with Fox News. But we're going to have all this money in there, and I say I want it back. Weapons approved under Joe Biden's presidency are still flowing to Ukraine, the new US Special Envoy to Kyiv, Keith Kellogg, said on Monday. There's not necessarily any need in the next 24 hours to do it any different, Kellogg said in an interview with the Reuters news agency. The Trump administration plans to push European allies to buy more American weapons for Ukraine, as they did under the Biden administration, ahead of potential peace talks with Moscow, according to Reuters. Kellogg will discuss this with European allies this week during the Munich Security Conference, which begins on Friday. The development, if confirmed, may be reassuring to Ukrainian leaders that the flow of arms will continue. Kellogg declined to confirm the plan to Reuters, but said, the US always likes selling weapons made in America because it strengthens our economy. There are a lot of options out there. Everything is in play right now. It is believed that administration officials view an arms purchase deal with Europe as a potential workaround, allowing Washington to support Kyiv without spending US taxpayer dollars. The NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte, has said Europe would pay for US arms for Ukraine. On the potential for peace talks, Kellogg told Reuters, I wouldn't say we're at the beginning of the peace planning process because we've been thinking through it, adding that US officials in Munich would, quote, deliver our expectations to the Allies. More importantly, we want to hear from them. On Monday, Donald Trump confirmed that Kellogg would soon visit Ukraine. A source in the Ukrainian president's office told Agence France-Presse that Kellogg would arrive in Ukraine on 20th of February. Zelensky's spokesperson Sergei Nikiforov told AFP that Ukraine's president would meet with the US Vice President J.D. Vance on Friday on the sidelines of the Munich conference. On Monday, Transnistria, the pro-Russian region of Moldova, rejected a new European gas offer despite experiencing a severe energy crisis since Gazprom deliveries via Ukraine stopped. The Transnistria leadership said the region would instead take Russia-financed gas transported from Hungary, which receives gas from Russia via the Turk Stream pipeline through Turkey. Moldova has criticised the whole affair as a destabilisation tactic by Russia. It seems, Maureen, that Trump's attitude to Ukraine becomes ever more transactional, as we've seen in other areas where he's operating. Are we any closer to diplomatic settlements and the start of a peace process, do you think?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Trump is just creating chaos by so many executive orders and everything, and trying to do everything at once to show that he's the greatest thing on earth. But I clearly think he doesn't really know what to do with Ukraine. I mean, he says he's got a great relationship with Putin, but on the other hand, he has to, although you wouldn't think it at the moment, keep his Western allies on board. What he seems to be doing with what you were saying is putting much more onus on Europe itself to fund the war. Although, as you say, arms and weapons are still managing to reach Ukraine, those ones that were promised under Joe Biden's presidency. It's interesting that Ukraine are still keeping up the pressure by targeting Russian energy plants. But I mean, Russia is such a vast country. It's just those that, are within, 1,000 miles of the border with Ukraine that are suffering. However, it is important for Ukraine to keep up the pressure on Russia in the run-up to when Trump gets round to it, concentrating on Ukraine and trying to find a solution.
Yes, thank you. We turn now to the Middle East. At least 48,219 Palestinians have been killed and 111,665 injured in Gaza since the 7th of October 2024, according to the Gaza Health Authority. Trump said his plan to take over Gaza would not include a right of return for the more than 2 million Palestinians whom he has said have no alternative but to leave because of the destruction left by Israel's military campaign. Trump continued to endorse a plan for the Palestinians to be resettled in Egypt and Jordan, a plan that both countries have rejected. The remarks are the latest effective endorsement of ethnic cleansing by the US president. Trump also said he might withhold aid to Jordan and Egypt if those countries do not take Palestinian refugees being relocated from Gaza. The US president hosted Jordan's King Abdullah II at the White House on Tuesday as he escalates pressure on the Arab nation to take in refugees from Gaza, perhaps permanently, as part of his audacious plan to remake the Middle East. The visit is happening at a perilous moment for the ongoing ceasefire. In response to Hamas's announcement delaying the release of hostages, Israel's Security Cabinet has moved forward a meeting to discuss negotiations on the second phase of the ceasefire, which had been set for this evening. The army has cancelled all leave for soldiers in the Gaza division, the Kan news outlet reported, in a sign that Israeli authorities are preparing for the resumption of war. Mediators fear a breakdown of the 3-week-old ceasefire and have postponed talks until they receive a clear indication of Washington's intent to continue with a phased deal, according to reports. Qatar had reportedly warned Israeli officials at the weekend that even the first stage of the ceasefire deal was being put in jeopardy by provocative statements from Benjamin Netanyahu and by his government's approach to talks on a second stage. Israeli police raided a leading Palestinian-owned bookshop in Jerusalem and detained 2 of its owners, accusing them of selling books that supported terrorism, including a children's colouring book entitled From the Jordan to the Sea. Karim Khan, the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the ICC, is the first person to be hit with economic and travel sanctions authorised by Trump that target the court over investigations of US citizens or US allies, the White House has confirmed. The US President signed an executive order last week authorizing aggressive economic sanctions against the ICC, accusing the body of illegitimate and baseless actions targeting the US and Israel. Former UK Supreme Court Judge Lord Sumption described Israel's assault on Gaza as grossly disproportionate and said there was at least an arguable case that it was genocidal. Lord Sumption, who served on the UK's highest court from 2012 to 2018, was one of the highest profile signatories of a letter last year warning that the UK government was breaching international law by arming Israel. Now, given that everything in that story has the shadow of President Trump hanging over it, I will continue with the next one before going to Maureen for a comment. Benjamin Netanyahu said that Israel will resume fighting in Gaza if Hamas does not release all of its hostages by noon on Saturday, taking his lead from a threat by Donald Trump that will shatter the 3-week-old ceasefire between the two sides. Netanyahu's ultimatum was delivered during a video address posted to social media accounts on Tuesday. The military will return to intense fighting until Hamas is finally defeated, he said. Late on Monday, Trump told reporters, "If all the Gaza hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 p.m, I would say, cancel the ceasefire, let all hell break loose." Trump hosted King Abdullah of Jordan at the White House today for a tense meeting where the two were to discuss Trump's plan to, quote, take over Gaza and expel the region's more than 2 million Palestinians. Asked outside the West Wing whether Saturday remained his deadline for Hamas, Trump replied, yes. Trump also said that he could conceivably withhold aid to Jordan and Egypt, some of the US's closest allies in the region, unless they agreed to his plan for the US to take over Gaza and to relocate millions of Palestinians to the neighbouring states in what would amount to an effective ethnic cleansing. If they don't agree, I would conceivably withhold it, Trump said. That threat came after Egypt rejected any compromise that would infringe on Palestinian rights. In a statement issued after the Egyptian Foreign Minister, Badr Abdelati, met with his US counterpart in Washington. Earlier today, Hamas derided Trump's latest comments on the war in Gaza and reiterated its commitment to a diplomatic solution to the crisis. Sami Abu Zuri, a senior Hamas official, said, "Trump must remember there is an agreement that must be respected by both parties, and this is the only way to bring back the Israeli prisoners. The language of threats has no value and only complicates matters." In Tel Aviv, protesters blocked roads on Monday night and Tuesday, demanding the return of all hostages, as some relatives accused the government of sabotaging the deal. Well, Maureen, an awful lot to unpick there, but starting with Trump and Netanyahu. Netanyahu certainly seems to be emboldened by the stance that Trump has taken in this.
Yes, he clearly sees that the leader of the free world, and put that in inverted commas, has clearly got his back on anything that he intends to do. And they've clearly, after the meeting last week, got a plan of what they want to do. Although I did feel at the press conference with Netanyahu that Trump was coming up with some things that they clearly hadn't discussed before. However, it's clear that Netanyahu's gone back to Israel emboldened and ready to call all the shots, and it hasn't been helped by the very emaciated state of the hostages that were released on Saturday. So I think there's wriggle room here. I mean, I heard Trump at his press conference today say that he didn't think that the deadline of 12 o'clock on Saturday would come into force. But clearly, the ball is now in Hamas's court to see how they respond to this. In terms of the wider solution for Gaza and the Palestinians, Trump is sticking by his idea that he's going to create this beautiful place for Palestinians, as if they're going to uproot from their homeland. And Egypt and Jordan are sticking by their view that they're not going to take in any Palestinians. And you can see why that would happen. I mean, Jordan already has something like 2 million refugees in its country. And if one thing is happening right now, I think it's uniting the Arab world against Israel and the US. And that would be a major feat in itself. So what King Hussein of Jordan said in the White House today was that there seems to be going to be a procession of Arab leaders come to visit Trump, and then together they will present the Arab view of what should happen in the Middle East. So I think, given that's in train, I think we'll have to wait a few days, if not weeks, to see what that position is. And really, it'll be very interesting to see what that position is.
Yeah, it's quite bizarre. I mean, as you say, there's apparently 2.49 million refugees in Jordan who've been there temporarily, in inverted commas, some since 1967. And
Yeah.
now potentially another 2 million. And Trump is saying, well, you've got to take them in. Your $1.5 billion of aid depends on this. While at the same time, he's wanting to stop immigration in the United States. I mean, surely even he must see the irony and the nonsense in this. And surely some of his advisors will point out the dangers of the destabilization of Jordan, which is one of the West's strongest allies in the region.
But I also thought that he'd stopped all US foreign aid anyway and humanitarian aid. So did they not stop the money for Jordan? You know, things don't add up in Trump world.
No, it is a unique kind of arithmetic. And surprise, surprise, our next story also involves Donald Trump. European and world leaders have promised swift retaliation after Donald Trump signed proclamations imposing 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium imports to the US in a move that risks precipitating a global trade war. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said today she deeply regretted the US President's decision, announced late on Monday, adding, "Unjustified tariffs on the EU will not go unanswered." Von der Leyen said the US tariffs would trigger firm and proportionate countermeasures, and vowed the 27-nation bloc would act to safeguard its economic interests. "We will protect our workers, businesses and consumers." The EU's Trade Commissioner Maros Šefčovič told the European Parliament that Trump's move would fuel inflation, but that the bloc remained committed to finding a mutually beneficial solution as soon as possible. Šefčovič said the Commission, the EU's executive body, was assessing the scope of the measures announced overnight and will be responding in a firm and proportionate way by countermeasures. Trump's move raises the US tariff rate on aluminium from 10% to 25% and eliminates all country exceptions, quota deals, and product-specific tariff exclusions for both metals, with effect from the 4th of March. He said it would simplify tariffs on the metals so everyone can understand it's 25% on all countries. He also promised reciprocal tariffs on all countries that tax imports from the US, and said he is looking at tariffs on cars and pharmaceuticals. UK steelmakers have warned that the imposition of new US tariffs would be a devastating blow to the industry. However, the UK government has not committed to imposing any retaliatory sanctions. Yeah, that last sentence is interesting, Maureen. Very strong words from Ursula von der Leyen. Rachel Reeves said, "We're not going to impose any sanctions. There are surely there's room for talks here before anything happens." So either she's taking a proportionate response, or she's being incredibly weak in the face of US pressure. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I think Stammer and his government are all over the place. Um, the EU is a bigger importer of UK steel and aluminium, or aluminum, as they say,
Mm.
um, than the US. I think we're sort of quite far down the line of exporters to the US. I didn't see the actual figures, but I think that's the case. And yet, Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer are feared at upsetting Trump. Now, there's only a limited time that you can ride two horses, and I think what happens is you fall down in the middle without any allies. So I think it's really, really stupid to one day of the week going to court European leaders and the European Union and ask for better trade deals, and on the other hand, not be firmer with Trump, where the European Union and Ursula von der Leyen are. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few days. If everyone else is retaliating, then why is Britain such an outlier? Do they really think they can curry favour with Trump by doing that? I'm not so sure.
No, I would share that doubt, and it does expose one of the many nonsenses in the Brexit argument that Britain could go it alone with a separate trade deal with the United States. Well, Trump is showing no interest in that, and all it appears is that Britain has no strength, unlike the EU, in imposing any retaliatory measures.
Yep.
The UK and US still, and the US and the UK have refused to sign a declaration on inclusive and sustainable artificial intelligence at a landmark Paris summit, in a blow to hopes for a concerted approach to developing and regulating the technology. The communique states that priorities include ensuring AI is open, inclusive, transparent, ethical, safe, secure, and trustworthy, taking into account international frameworks for all, and making AI sustainable for people and the planet. The document was backed by 60 other signatories on Tuesday, including France, China, India, Japan, Australia, and Canada. The UK Prime Minister's spokesperson said France was one of the UK's closest partners in AI, but the government would only ever sign up to initiatives that are in UK national interests. Confirmation of the snub came soon after the US Vice President, JD Vance, took to the stage at the Grand Palais to criticise Europe's excessive regulation of technology and warn against cooperating with China. Asked if the UK had declined to sign because it wanted to follow the US lead, Keir Starmer's spokesperson said they were not aware of the US reasons or position on the declaration. Campaign groups criticised the UK's decision and said it risked damaging its reputation in this area. Andrew Dudfield, the head of AI at Full Fact, said the UK risked undercutting its hard-won credibility as a world leader for safe, ethical and trustworthy AI innovation, and that there needed to be bolder government action to protect people from corrosive AI-generated misinformation. The Elysee Palace said more countries might sign the declaration in the hours after the two-day summit. Two other EU regulatory measures, the Digital Services Act (DSA) and GDPR, also received passing criticism from Vance. Singling out the DSA, which regulates social media, the Vice President said, "It is one thing to prevent a predator from preying on a child on the internet, and is something quite different to prevent a grown man or woman from accessing an opinion that the government thinks is misinformation. Well, the AI part of that, first of all, Maureen, it's hard to see what the UK could possibly gain from not signing this treaty. Have you any ideas?
I was just wondering, as you were giving us a resume of what's happened in Paris, and by the way, weren't those pictures, AI generated pictures of Macron, absolutely fantastic? I thought he was, bringing a bit of levity to the situation in the world at the moment. It was really quite refreshing. However, I digress. I think I was just wondering if Stammer now sees everything through a reform lens and how it would affect reform's position and reform's growth in the UK, because traditionally Labour has been keen, I would say, on reform that helps our citizens lead a safe life, or live in a country where they feel safe. And yet we see Stammer not signing a protocol or a deal on AI, which has been signed by so many countries in the world, including India and China. And as you say, if we're not seen at that meeting in the Grand Palais as being up there at the front, even although our universities and tech industries are really at the forefront of developing AI, then I think it's a really mixed message from the UK government. And I wonder whether our tech industries are really, tearing their hair out at the position here. I wonder what discussions Keir Starmer and his government had with the tech industries here in the UK before taking this stance on AI and GDPR and all the rest of it. But it seems to me, again, sitting on the fence or riding two horses, and you can't do that for very long.
Yes, and it's a worrying development when yesterday a company backed by Elon Musk's money spoke about making an offer for ChatGPT, the number one generative AI company. So you can understand why Vance was opposing it, but it seems very strange why the UK would take this position.
Yep.
Scotland now, and the SNP has accused Anna Sarwar of, quote, hypocrisy on stilts, and said that free tuition fees for students in Scotland are only safe under the SNP. Yesterday, the Labour leader in Scotland had claimed that Labour would maintain the policy of free tuition fees if it were elected at Holyrood. The claim comes despite the fact that it was Sarwar's Labour Party who first introduced fees in Scotland in 1998 through the Graduate Endowment Tax. Labour voted against the abolition of the tax by the SNP government in 2008. Tuition fees in England have risen to £9,535 since Labour came to power last year, whilst fees have also risen in Labour-run Wales. Labour's Scottish finance spokesperson Michael Mara hinted last year that the party would examine models to reintroduce some form of charges in Scotland. Record numbers of students from our most deprived areas in Scotland are going to university due to the Scottish Government's continued support for free tuition. A Scottish Labour social media post said it will protect bus passes, protect free university tuition, protect free prescriptions, protect the Scottish Child Payment. SNP MSP Karen Adams said, "This is hypocrisy on stilts from Anna Sarwar. History has shown that his Labour Party cannot be trusted on tuition fees. Whether in Scotland, England or Wales, fees have gone up under Labour governments." It increasingly looks like Anna Sarwar will say anything and adopt SNP policies in his desperate attempt to get into power. But why should voters trust him on tuition fees after broken promises on winter fuel payments, compensation for WASPy women, and the future of Grangemouth? Yes, Maureen, it was just a new list of promises to add to promises which have already been broken in the short time that Labour has been in power in Westminster. What do you
Yeah, it
make
was
of it?
quite astonishing today how that the BBC were so keen to hurriedly arrange this press conference for Anna Sarwar and say that he was keeping all these things that the SNP government have done. And then the strap line at the bottom was a change in direction. I mean, that is unbelievable. But he clearly can't remember his history of who introduced what. He was trying to claim that the Lib administration from 1999 to 2007 had introduced free tuition fees, which, as you say, clearly wasn't the case. So he's all over the place. He's clearly running scared. He doesn't know what to do. He, sort of stammers coming at him from one side and undermining any credibility that Labour have in Scotland. And on the other hand, John Swinney is quietly and, with an iron fist driving through policy and delivering on commitments. So he clearly just doesn't know what to do at the moment. He's completely lost. But the thing is that he's getting angry because he can see at the moment, and there's still a long way to go before the election in May 2026, but he can see any Labour lead in Scotland gradually being frittered away.
I'm interested in. There's been a fair outcry in Scotland over the broken promises on Grangemouth, on WASPy women. Perhaps not as much as there would have been in past years, where you might argue there was a resigning matter. Is this ability to promise things and not follow through just incompetence on Anna Sarwar's part, or are we taking a leaf from Trump's book? Well, it doesn't matter if you lie. People don't believe politicians anyway, and you'll see when you get into power how things will work out.
Well, I do think there's a resignation and ennui among Britons and including Scots with politics and politicians. But the SNP have managed to cut through that in 2007, and my hope and what I'm working to is make sure that we cut through that in 2026 again. And we'll only do that by delivering on our manifesto and also giving a clear future as to why independence is the best option for people living in Scotland. And both of those, one, we can see the work being done, and the other work is happening behind the scenes. So it is, I can completely understand people's, as I say, fed upness with politics and politicians. But, you can't just resign yourself to it, especially if you're active in politics. You've got to keep fighting against that. And that's why it's so important for a party like ours, with still a mass membership, to make sure that our activists are out there on the doorsteps, giving a version of what's happening that's different from what they can see and get on the mainstream media.
Thank you. UK government now, and Labour MP Clive Lewis has accused the Home Office of enabling the mainstreaming of racism after footage showing people being removed from the UK was released for the first time. The government announced on Monday that nearly 19,000 refused asylum seekers, foreign criminals, and other immigration offenders had been returned to their home countries since the general election. The Home Office declined to say which countries they had been returned to, other than across Africa, Asia, Europe and South America. Clive Lewis, the Labour MP for Norwich South, said ministers were enabling the mainstreaming of racism by showing people being deported. Detention Action, an NGO, said it was an act of performative cruelty by the government. The Labour government has ramped up its anti-migrant media campaign in the face of a growing political threat from Reform UK. The footage shows men being taken off a bus and up the stairway of a charter jet to be deported from the UK. Their faces blurred, the men are surrounded by Border Force staff. The previously secret process of removals shows each detainee surrounded by up to 5 guards wearing high-vis yellow vests. One of the men being removed is shown wearing handcuffs. Home Office sources said it showed a flight of 47 foreign criminals and refused asylum seekers being deported to an unnamed European destination. Accompanying the release of the footage, a press release said the Home Office had, for the first time, shared images of the inner working of the removals process. Lewis said, "Just using harsh and cruel language or bringing in longer sentences or filming people being put onto planes will not solve the problem. Seeking asylum is not a criminal act, and filming people who have been refused permission to stay in the UK is cruel." Lewis added that consecutive Labour and Conservative governments were in fact mainstreaming racism by pandering to the demands of reform. So clearly they're, Maureen, taking a leaf from Reform's book and trying to match their words on immigration, but also copying what Trump did in the first week with showing film of deportees. So again, it seems to be taking something from the American handbook.
Yes, and I honestly don't see what Stammer thinks he can gain from doing that. I mean, I thank God that John Swinney has said that he's not going to carry out politics on reform's ground and engage with reform and what they're trying to do. And I think Stammer is wrong in trying to out-reform reform. You know, clearly, if you believe the polls, an awful lot of people are bothered about migration. I never come across anybody who's bothered about migration, but clearly, if you believe the mainstream media, it's the number one issue. And nobody really drills down and says, well, you know, people are coming here to do the jobs where there's nobody in Britain to do it, willing or able to do it. So, to do these jobs. So, it's all, the whole topic of immigration is treated without any real in-depth analysis of what's going on. You know, there's a big difference between refugees and illegal migrants and migrants who are coming in legally. So I think Clive Lewis is right on balance to call this out. But, you know, there are so many other things that need attention, and you sometimes think that immigration and race and stirring racism is just a smokescreen to stop us seeing and hearing and discussing the real issues like the economy and housing that are affecting Britons, and why, you know, there's this feeling of misery and nothing's getting any better in the country. And there's always got to be a scapegoat, hasn't there?
Yes, history has shown that in every repressive regime, and I mean what you say there is just backing up what Hugh Marshall was saying on our Sunday programme in the valley he lives in Wales. That immigration is an issue because we're not getting enough people coming in to do the jobs here, and the immigrants we have are the ones who are taking care of the elderly as care workers, but there's not enough of them, and there's a similar situation in Scotland, I suspect.
Yep, absolutely.
Now, press freedom Organizations have warned that Donald Trump's foreign aid freeze will lead to a decline in the number of independent media outlets across the world, causing a surge in misinformation and playing into the hands of state propagandists. The US president has suspended billions of dollars in projects supported by US aid, including more than $268 million allocated to support independent media and the free flow of information. A USAID fact sheet accessed by the Press Freedom Campaign group Reporters Without Borders before being taken offline showed that in 2023 the US agency funded training and support for 6,200 journalists, assisted 707 non-state news outlets, and supported 279 civil society organizations dedicated to strengthening independent media in more than 30 countries, including Iran, Afghanistan, and Russia. RSF said Trump's decision had sowed chaos and confusion. Clayton Weimers, executive director of RSF US, said, "Non-profit newsroom and media organizations have already had to cease operations and lay off staff. The most likely scenario is that after the 90-day freeze, they will disappear forever." In Ukraine, where the media had until recently been largely controlled by oligarchs, 9 out of 10 outlets rely on subsidies, and US aid is the primary donor, according to RSF. "It's a very dangerous moment," said Anna Babinets, chief executive and co-founder of the Kyiv-based investigative platform Slidsvo.info, which has lost 80% of its funding from groups that formerly received money from US aid. Trump has made unsubstantiated claims that billions were stolen at US aid to pay for positive media coverage of his opponents in what he calls the fake news media, while Elon Musk called US aid a criminal organization and said it had paid media to publish their propaganda. Weimar said a decline in the number of independent news outlets could lead to a surge in misinformation. Chaos causes a vacuum, and when you pull reliable sources of information, that vacuum will be filled with less reliable sources, such as state propagandists, he said. In Belarus, Natalia Belikova of Press Club Belarus said 70% of her organization's funding came from a mix of US federal sources, and that various cuts and freezes to funding had put it on the brink of existence. Belarus has orchestrated widespread persecution campaigns against journalists and forced hundreds of reporters into exile in recent years. The Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, which operates globally and has produced in-depth investigations such as the Panama Papers, which scrutinise secretive offshore tax regimes, said 29% of its funding had been frozen and it's had to lay off 20% of its staff. In Afghanistan, where there are draconian restrictions on media freedom under the Taliban, independent journalists have contributed reports to Afghan media outlets outside the country. Shafi Karimi, founder of the Afghan Journalists in Exile network, said, "Many of my journalist friends inside the country have lost their jobs, and several media outlets are at risk of closing." These organizations relied on funding from various US institutions, and without this support, their ability to continue operating remains uncertain. Worrying times there. Of course, that's not the only problem with US aid. There's stopping programs which are getting children vaccinated, eradicating diseases in various countries. But this is also a worrying step. And as one of the spokesmen there pointed out, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not just they don't get funded. Of course, somebody else steps in to fill the void with their chosen message.
Yes, that's the point that I was going to make, Douglas, that if you leave a vacuum in any area like this, then someone else will step in. And has this not crossed Trump's mind that this is going to happen? Because the people who are going to step in are China, Russia, or Iran, all the West's enemies. And that means that the influence of the West declines in the world overall. I mean, we've seen it in Africa. where China has gone in and built parliaments, like in Malawi's built the parliament building, and other African countries in return for the resources that these countries have. But they can also step in the area of filling the gaps in information about what's going on in the world and give their perspectives on it. So this is very dangerous, I think, for Western democracies and the influence that they should have in the world. I mean, we already, long before Trump came into power, seeing some North African countries, Egypt included, questioning whether democracy is really the way to go forward, especially, when the West has pulled out of countries in the Middle East and left vacuums in Libya and other countries, instead of making sure that there were governments ready to step in and then ready to have free and fair elections. So I just despaired. Is anybody thinking about the long term here?
Well, yes, you do. I mean, you do wonder, and it's not just faraway places that they announced that they were going to stop funding Voice of America and Radio Free Europe, which have been broadcasting throughout the Cold War and still play a major role in exposing corruption and government mismanagement in countries in Eastern Europe. So it's a worrying time for journalism worldwide. Back to Scotland now, and the public are to be invited to submit their views on how to make the council tax system fairer as part of wider efforts to explore options and build a consensus for potential reform. A joint programme of engagement by the Scottish Government and COSLA will commission independent analysis to examine the council tax system, accounting for market changes, reforms and improvements. The expert and independent analysis will provide high-level analysis and modelling on alternative scenarios and reforms of the system. Following that, a range of activities to seek the views from a wide range of people from across Scotland will be undertaken, consisting of three key elements: a formal public consultation process, a number of public events or town hall meetings held over the autumn months, ensuring a reasonable geographical spread and diversity, a set of focused discussions with key stakeholders and experts. The public engagement will aim to capture a wide spectrum of opinions and considered responses, ensuring a diverse range of perspectives, including representation from those paying council tax across different bands. This will inform public engagement later this year, followed by a Scottish Parliament debate on the findings and proposed policy reforms. Finance Secretary Shona Robeson said, "Partnering with COSLA, we want to examine ways to make council tax fairer, which will help to continue to deliver better public services across Scotland. By working closely with local authorities and listening to the public, we'll be seeking a consensus on a local taxation system that is fair, financially sustainable, and fits a modern Scotland." Now, I may be misunderstanding what's behind this, Maureen, but I believe that it was a consultation only on bands E to H of the council tax, and that they were bringing about regressive taxation, in that the poorest people were paying the highest amount of tax. And the opposition parties might say, well, there's been a pledge to look at an alternative to council tax since 2017 in SNP manifestos. So why are you just now looking at tinkering around the edges of the system?
Well, council tax, yes. I think since I entered Parliament and before, local taxation has been a bit of a minefield. I'm old enough to remember Margaret Thatcher's hated poll tax and going on loads of demonstrations about that. I mean, in 2017, I think it was the local government minister at the time, Marco Biaggi, to be fair to him, did a huge amount of work trying to get some consensus across parties, across local government, academics in this field, and everything to try and agree on a form of local taxation going forward. And it came to nothing. And I suppose this is, well, not knowing the real reasons behind it, but one can surmise if we're looking at the lower tax bands, then it's tied up with the whole idea of trying to reduce poverty and create a fairer, more equitable society. So maybe it is just nothing's going to happen in the lifetime of this parliament. I think it would be too late to do anything major in terms of legislation. So whether it's, things that can be that some sort of reform could be in local government manifesto in 2027, I don't know, but it's worth taking the time to look at this again and see if there can be any agreement on a form of local government, of local taxation that can be agreed across the board and not open to change every time there's a different government comes in.
Yeah, I'm sure that would be welcome, and let's hope it's possible to build some consensus on that. Staying with the Scottish Government, and more than 100 organisations across Scotland working to tackle violence against women and girls will share in a funding uplift of £2.4 million. The funding boost will bring the total Scottish Government investment in delivering Equally Safe, which funds projects to prevent violence and support survivors, up to £21.6 million for the year ahead, subject to the 2025-26 budget being approved. The Delivering Equally Safe Fund has supported organisations across Scotland in their work to tackle violence against women and girls since 2021. Equalities Minister Callum Stewart announced the funding increase on a visit to Say Women, a Glasgow charity offering safe accommodation and emotional support for young survivors of sexual abuse who are facing homelessness. Ms. Stewart said grassroots organisations across Scotland are at the heart of tackling violence against women and girls. Their work is fundamental to creating a country free from gender-based abuse. This funding boost will support these organisations, will help prevent abuse occurring, and ensure that women and girls who have experienced violence continue to access the support they deserve. Well, I suppose, Maureen, it's to be welcome that there's increased funding in this area, but to be deplored that it's necessary, that there's still such a problem in Scotland.
Yes, I mean, it's not confined to Scotland, is it? I mean, we've seen what's happened in France with the case there. And it's, throughout the whole of the UK and in all corners of society. I remember the first domestic abuse case that I heard of was a professor at a university against his wife. So, it's a myth to say that it's just in poor families. It's not. However, it's just going through the list, it's a huge list of organisations that are being supported and covering the whole of Scotland and all the diverse communities that we have in Scotland. And as you say, Douglas, it's ridiculous that in the 21st century that we are still talking about domestic abuse and that it's still happening. I mean, what is happening in families that they are not bringing up their children to realise that violence, and it's normally against women, is totally unacceptable in this day and age. But we're seeing misogyny increasing in all areas of society, and that can often be accompanied by domestic abuse as well. So I'm wondering what's happening to the report that Dame Helena Kennedy produced, and whether there's going to be any legislation in that area during the lifetime of this Parliament in Scotland.
Thank you. Our final story was to be Scottish Government support for Orkney's farmers and food producers, which we don't have time to go into tonight, but just in brief, First Minister John Swinney visited the Orkney Auction Mart, which has received a £15,000 grant as a lead partner to help build the business case for a new fit-for-purpose processing plant, which is part of the Scottish Government's Small Producers Pilot Fund, which this year has provided a total of £256,500 to support private kill abattoirs, including in Shetland, Wishaw, Barra, Dingwall and Mull. By creating more localised supply chains, the fund aims to increase the proportion of food grown and processed by small farms and smallholders and consumed within the community. I'm sure we will return probably on a Sunday programme to Scotland's food industry in some depth in coming weeks. But that's it for this evening's Scotland at 7. Thank you very much once again to our guest tonight, Maureen Watt, for her contribution and for her long-standing support of our programmes. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We raised £20,000 from April to the end of 2024, £16,000 short of our £36,000 target. We had to borrow £12,000 to enable us to pay our bills and survive, but the pressure is still on, and we need to find enough regular donors to give us financial security. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,500. We need more regular subscribers, but we need to clear our debts as well. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. So thank you again to Maureen, and thank you to you at home or wherever you are for watching. Please join us at Scotland at 7 throughout this week and for our weekend review of the news, the full Scottish, at noon on Sunday. But for me, for tonight, thank you and good night.